We have learned from John A. Powell that belonging is both subjective and objective. To us, this means that in order to advance belonging, we must engage in actions that help more people to more regularly access this feeling of belonging through transforming the structures we work within and are connected to. We acknowledge that the conditions for individual belonging may vary from person to person, requiring us to listen to others, to incorporate their ideas, and to ultimately develop strategies that meet the needs for a wide range of people. While the experience of belonging is subjective, there are objective conditions, processes, policies, and structures that can be changed to increase access to belonging. Welcome, everyone, to When We Belong. We're excited because, of course, we are bringing you some different discussions around belonging and what it looks like for all of us who are here to give you our personal understanding of it as we work to make sure that the enterprise is also understanding it. That in our personal roles, we experience various versions of what belonging looks like for folks. And we really wanted to create this opportunity to kind of share some of those insights with all of you. And today we're going to be talking about how we enact belonging in the midst of conflict. How do these two identities and these two situations are really opportunities? How do they showcase themselves and how do we do it together? So I'm TraeAnna Holiday and I'm excited to be here with all of you. And honestly, I'm excited to have my panelists who will be introducing themselves. I'll pass it right on over to Megan Matthews.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here with you, Trey and Mikia. My name is Megan Matthews. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the director for the Office of Equity. And I'm excited to be in space where we can have these conversations about theories and understand how it should guide us in our actions. And I'll pass
Hello.
to Mikia.
Hello, everyone. I am Mikia Guy, she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Equity and Grants at Serve Washington within the Office of Financial Management. And I also am excited at being able to unpack some of these concepts that tend to feel larger than life, but through authentic conversation can really be broken down into actionable steps for change.
Absolutely. Well, you see, I got two powerhouses here. And again, TraeAnna Holiday, she, her. I'm the communications director for Washington State's Office of Equity. And this is a concept that as soon as we started talking about it, we had so much to unpack. Right now, we are all understanding of the kind of international conflicts that are around us and how they impact us sometimes may not be so understood. But as we're working to build belonging, it's clear that there are some things that we need to be able to address when we talk about bringing belonging in the midst of conflict. Megan, I want to send it over to you because you had some really phenomenal ideas about why this was even an important topic for us to be going over right now. Tell us more.
Yeah, so, our office is really centering this idea of belonging, creating a space where it's yours too. Where you can show up and be your authentic self, where you are, we feel like you're connected and you are a part of our community. And so just thinking about all the things that are happening in the world and how that's now impacting people in Washington State where we are, I just wanted to have more of a dialogue because the ideas that I'm hearing are kind of now making me think about three just main concepts. When you talk about belonging, can you talk about belonging without recognizing power and the role of power? Power in the sense of that oftentimes in government and societies, we're organized in some kind of caste system, in some kind of hierarchy, where there are folks who have the ability to inform decisions and make decisions. There are people who have access to opportunities, resources. There are people whose voices cause action or people listen to their voices. And then there are those who don't have as much, and there are some who don't have any. And I think when we're talking about belonging, when thinking about the our office convening the governor's summit a couple of years ago, and John Powell said, this isn't where I'm inviting you to my party where I'm going to play the music I want to, have the food I want to, and that the activities or games I want to, but this is a party that we create together. We get to develop the menu. We get to create the song list. We get to figure out what games we want to play together, and we get to clean up together as well, right? So we are all part of this process. And so you really can't have this conversation about belonging without understanding power and proximity to power. The other thing is justice. So, you know, in the Black community, one of our rallying cries when we were protesting during Jim Crow and the civil rights movement was no justice, no peace. Now, what does that mean? When you unpack that, is that, and they really, I think, understood this in after the end of apartheid in South Africa with the Truth and Reconciliation Councils, right? Is that you have to have some way to bring truth, amplify truth, and have some way to reconcile the groups of people together to move forward. And so this concept of justice is really about how do we deal with the wrongs and the harms that have been committed over a period of time and move forward so that people who were oppressed, experienced the harm, were burdened, now feel made whole, or at least feel validated so they can move forward and society can move forward together. And then this connection of humanity, you know, we in Washington state, we don't directly influence, at least most of us don't directly influence what's happening internationally. And even oftentimes, although for us, who specifically us three in the government, right, we have a little more influence over what's happening to Washingtonians, but broadly across the nation and across the globe, we don't have a direct impact over what's happening, what governments do, what society does. But even here, there's a sense of a loss of humanity where if you're on one side, if I disagree with you, now I see you as less than a human being. And this dehumanization, this process of dehumanization is a huge component of white supremacy, because then it means I can treat you however I want to treat you, or I don't care what happens to you, right? And really then you start to see a loss of the circle of concern, what happens to people who are in our state right now, because that's, you know, we're in Washington state. We don't care what happens to them. And I really see that as then the breakdown of society, because Ubuntu, one of Office Equity's values is I am because we are, our destinies are linked, right? So what happens to people in our communities impacts us all. If everyone's not thriving, then the society really isn't operating at its best. And so thinking about the intersection of belonging and conflict, what do we do when we're in conflict? You know, conflict that's external or conflict with each other. If me and Trey are in conflict, or me and Mikia are in conflict, how do we still, what do we do to operate and still pursue this idea and concept of belonging?
Yeah, valuable points. And honestly, there's so much to unpack with all of that, because each one those points you mentioned has their own lineage, right? How do we get to the solution of each one of those roads? Mikia, what kind of concepts would you like to add and share here when we're talking about conflict and belonging?
Man, I'm trying to think, like, how do I follow that? Because there, like you said, there's so much within, you know, in those nuggets that that Megan provided. And I think, first of all, when you think about that concept of justice, it requires a mindset shift to solidarity, because you can't really embody justice if you don't feel that connection, that solidarity to humanity. There was, I read something somewhere, and I cannot remember where, that said they're standing for us and then they're standing with us. And there's a time for each of those things, right? And being able to understand the idea that we cannot get anywhere, as Megan was talking earlier, until we hit the root of what we're dealing with. We just keep dealing with the symptoms. We keep dealing with the symptoms. We're not dealing with at the root of everything, which is really our lack of understanding of what justice means, or the importance of justice. When we're in community with each other, as Megan said, you know, how do we deal with the conflict and still be together and still be in solidarity and still be in community and respecting each other? It is because I can be in conflict with Megan because I understand Megan, because I know Megan, because I've taken the time to get to know Megan. I can be in conflict with a colleague who thinks differently than me because I take the time to get to know them and understand them and allow them to get to know me. So we don't have to agree as long as we respect each other. You don't get respect until you understand people. You don't understand people until you really believe in their humanity. At least you don't try to understand them until you believe in their humanity. And when you believe in humanity, then you believe in justice. And I just don't think that we've gotten there yet as a society, as state government, to be honest.
Yeah, these are valid points. And I appreciate this discussion, because I'll say this. I mean, I think in community or anywhere, in order for you to really have an understanding of getting through conflict, you need conflict resolution tools, tips. What are you doing? What is the pathway to resolving conflict? And oftentimes you don't start a relationship with anyone, friendship, family, whatever, and actually address, well, okay, if we get to a head of where you feel one way, I feel another way, and I don't know how we can resolve, how are we going to resolve it? Let's be content about us being specific enough to say, we know that we may come across that time one day. So this is what my personal theory is around conflict resolution. What is yours? And how do we meet in the middle? Like, you don't even start a friendship like that, right? You don't really think about conflict until you're in the midst of conflict. And at that point, now you have all of this emotion that's involved. You have all of this different sentiment. There's a history of how you got there. And there's this resoluteness, honestly, to your position. Most oftentimes it is, I am firm in knowing that you're the one who's wrong here. I'm not the one who's wrong, right? And so this idea of right, wrong, this kind of idea of, you know, a win-lose type of situation, somebody's wrong, somebody's right. There's no real kind of, well, okay, here's where I kind of went wrong. All right, well, I can identify that these are the moments where I went wrong here, and then you meeting in the middle. And so, you know, when in community, we talk about addressing conflict head on. So we don't tend to do that either, right? Because if I got a conflict with Megan, I'm over here talking to the last person who had a conflict with Megan, because I need to feel like my resolve, my resoluteness, and my decision to be in conflict with Megan is now I got a cheerleader who's also like, yeah, girl, because I remember when I said, and I'm like, yeah, I remember when you said, and at the time I didn't get it, but now I get it, right? Because we're looking for someone to validate our positioning in the conflict. So this happens over and over again, and it spirals out of control, right? But in community, I say, no, if I got a conflict with Megan, I'm taking it directly to Megan, because I'm looking for a win-win solution here. Me taking it to the last person who had a conflict with them, oh, I know you always be talking about them because you know, for years you done had an issue, and I need to feel like I got somebody on my side. Instead of me doing that, I actually open myself up to conflict resolution by taking it directly to Megan. So when you said this thing, I kind of felt this way, or it took me down a certain path where I realized I didn't necessarily appreciate your perspective on this because of maybe my history, my whatever, right? Or the way that it's affecting maybe my role. So I think we need to be focused more on the ways that we're trying to really bring this out in community now. How do I take something directly to the person and deal with it right there with them? I don't need everyone around me telling me I'm right. I don't need that. I think historically speaking, taking it out of just like Black community and thinking historically, conflict is oftentimes resolved by war. And that is essentially where we see ourselves now. Two different factions of whatever the situation is, the only way that we can resolve this is we got to basically decimate you. We got to get you to get so on your knees about your environment, your resources, lack thereof. We have to destroy you so that we can dominate you. And the idea around belonging being centered in any of this is such a blind spot for everyone, because they're not working to see the other person as themselves. So there's a lot of concepts here in terms of seeing the other as an extension of you. We're all really one. We're all like, essentially, we have these different backgrounds and all this kind of stuff, but we all bleed in red. We all, right? That concept of us coming from something that just factions off into our personal existence, but really it's this oneness that we fail to remember. So I go back to that when I realize, when we're talking about conflict, what is it that pours into conflict? And how do we reflect on the origin of conflict when we're in the midst of it? Mikia, I see you want to say some things.
Yeah, I did, because as you're talking, and it activated something in me, because you talked about how we go elsewhere to seek validation. And what we're missing when we do that is we're not valuing each other. Like, I would go straight to you because I value our relationship, our working relationship, our friendship, or whatever it is, as I'm an as early as possible person. We had a little rumble at 2:43. When we get out of that meeting, I'm calling you immediately. I'm messaging you immediately because I value our relationship. And again, we don't have to agree. We don't have to agree, but I value this connection. And so I will let you know that I value you by addressing this with you, because I want our relationship to continue. And to be honest, there are times where there are people who I'm like, I do not care enough to address this situation. They're wrong and they can be wrong. They said the sky is green. I love that for them. And I will just leave it there because I'm not really valuing that connection with that person. And then I think the same is when we're looking at this, at these global conflicts and political conflicts. It is we are not resolving anything with these wars. We are eradicating with these wars, but then there's still that trauma that came up behind it. You know, we didn't resolve the issue of Black America because slavery ended. Just a whole bunch of issues. It's done. Like, it is now illegal to have a slave. However, it isn't quite illegal to treat people the way that Black America has been treated, right? We can say it, but we see what happens. Okay, we know what's going on in the news and we see what's happening in the world. And so when we're looking,
don't forget about it's still legal to have slaves if you incarcerate them
in prison. Yeah.
Okay, right. And look at that. And look at that.
Mass incarceration.
Right. And there's prison incarceration in other countries that don't even look the way that it looks over here. You know, that is one area that, you know, we lead in the world is in our incarceration, not in a good way. Just there's a lot of them. There's a lot happening. People are not being rehabilitated. They're not taught how to re-enter well. And so we've got all these re-entry programs that we're not funding well, but that's another story for another day. So we have all these things because we're not valuing people. We are a society who wants to be on top by any means necessary, whatever that takes. So if that means stomping this down, we're going to do that because we don't have value in that. The things that we value is where our money is, and it shows. What we're funding, that's what we value. What we are promoting, that's what we value. The discord and the discourse that we're putting out there, that is what we value, instead of valuing humanity, period. And so when I think about conflict resolution, it is definitely dependent on the value that I have for whomever I'm in conflict with, for their humanity, because I can value you and not really like you, but you're human. So I'm not going to talk to you like you're trash. I might say some things that you don't like, but I'm not going to talk to you like, because you're human. And I value your humanity. Now, we don't have to be friends after this, but I give you that. And so it really, I think that point that you brought up, and I'm going to be ruminating on this for a while, is that validation that we seek, because we all do it. We can always find an enemy of our enemy, right? Because the enemy of my enemy is my friend, you know, so I'm going to work with that person. But if we take it back to valuing our relationships, the people that we're working with, the people that we're serving, because we're public servants as state government employees, if we value the people that we're serving with the money that we're supposed to be stewarding well and distributing that out to the community in an equitable way, because we value the community and we value the honor of actually being in these positions of power that we're in, we're not, this is an honor to be where we are and to have the positions we hold and the responsibilities we have and the influence that we have. And we need to have value over that and not hold it as kind of like a, ooh, look at me, mama, I made it. But okay, now that I'm here, how am I reaching back? How am I giving back?
Agreed, 100%. Megan.
Yeah, I was thinking about, as you were talking about conflict resolution and, acknowledging where you also contributed to. I thought about a saying that says, I can't remember who said it, but the more I know, the less I know.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me think about humility, right? To be able to come and say, you know what it is about valuing relationships, because there's another saying something about you can be right, or you can be in a relationship, or you can be whatever the thing is, right? So it's and also recognizing it takes two to tango. We got all kind of sayings. Okay, we can do this all day, right? Two to tango. Really, these conflicts, you have to be willing to say, I'm gonna humble myself and I'm gonna acknowledge where I went wrong. And I hope that you're gonna meet me and do the same thing, right? And together we'll figure out how to move forward. Because the goal of any kind of conflict resolution should be to figure out how we resolve it where this thing doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
Right. Mm. And when I am in conflict, it's okay, what do we need to do to make sure we don't end up here? Like, how did we get here so we can understand how we can solve it for the next time? But to do that, you have to have some humility.
Yes.
And, I know people who are like, well, I'm right. And there's no nuance, right? You also have to understand nuance. Because if you're thinking like I was wrong here, then you have to understand that someone else was wrong there and that they were right there and you were right here, which means that everything's not black and white. In fact, as I get older, there's less and less that's black and white. Now we're talking about equity and justice, like these are concepts, right? But how you implement them or how you approach it is not black and white. It's so complicated and so complex, and there's always so much nuance. And when I see sometimes our approach to conversation and dialogue coming from this is either this or nothing. And I'm like, we'll never get anywhere, because who are you to say that your answer, your perspective is the only one or the valid one or the one that is over anybody else's approach to the concept, right? And I think that if we are going to value our society, because our society, you were talking about our society, Mikia, and I was like, our society values winning for some. Because there's not very many people in Washington State or in America overall who are actually winning. I think people talk about like some concepts that they have about self-sufficiency or, even the ability to have autonomy, choice over their lives. But I think very few people would say they're winning. Yet as a society, we're always talking about how we're number one, right? And if you really look at a lot of our outcomes in America, we're really like number one in some pretty terrible metrics, right?
Incarceration.
Yeah, so thinking about how I think we all need to be more in touch with our humility, to recognize that there's value in sometimes what other people say. I think about this concept of fiscal responsibility, right? And government effectiveness. And sometimes we're like, oh, that's not, it's not real, it's not true. But then I think about in government, how much waste we have because we're duplicating efforts, because we don't want to talk to each other. We're siloed, right? And if we were just to connect more with other organizations who have missions or mandates that are related to what we're doing, that we could be more effective and we possibly could save some money and have less waste, right? So I don't think some of these concepts are terrible. I think sometimes how they are used as weapons is terrible. But I think we need to have more genuine dialogue. We need to be more humble. We need to recognize that we don't know as much as we think we know. And we need to understand there's more nuance. And I even like you said, my kid too, about there's a time for each of these things. You said, forget what it's
Mhm.
reference to. There's a time. Yeah, so it doesn't always require the same approach, right? So like, let's be more innovative and creative and flexible. Let's meet people where they are. Let's have conversations where people are. In the Office of Equity, we're trying to go, when we go and do our convenings, we want to go across Washington State. So we're going to travel because we want to be where different communities are, where people don't always have to travel to come meet us. We want to be where you are, right? And so as we think about for state employees, how do we approach things that we're doing? How do we approach conflicts that we have with community? If we've done something wrong and community organizations show up and be like, and cuss us out, right? Are we going to sit there and be like, oh my gosh, you hurt my feelings? Does it hurt? Yes, it hurts, right? Because why? Well, we didn't intend for this to happen. But are we going to move past our own feelings and recognize that it's not about the intent, it's the impact of what we did, to hear what's being said and to cause us to act differently?
Yeah. I mean, this right here, this is the powerful part. And I think when we understand that there are things that are needing to happen as a collective, and then there are things that need to happen as individuals, right? Because we have the power to begin to change the trajectory of how conflict sits when we change our own individual actions regarding conflict. And one of those things for me is when someone comes to me because they're looking for that validation, right? What they often get from me is such a neutral point that it's not going to feed it, right? I'm not feeding into it, right? I'm like, oh yeah, they do act like that, but I will say that I get a part of it. They're going to get all of that from me, right? It's such a neutral thing. And even when I find myself being like, well, no, yeah, because I didn't really appreciate that. I always loop it back and I say, but at the same time, when I understand and put myself in that person's shoes, I get why they may have done this or that, right? And so there's parts of this that we get to actually pour some water on that fire and tame the coals a little bit when we take personal actions that allow for conflicts to disseminate. So if we're doing that individually, eventually it becomes a collective, right? When more and more individuals are doing something, the culture of conflict begins to change. And I think you have right now, particularly in times of war, war takes soldiers, right? Soldiers are the drivers of, yeah, you got leaders and everything, but if all the soldiers were like, we're putting our guns down, we're not doing it, you don't have a war, right? And so there's always individual actions that can happen that when they permeate, it creates a collective action. So I think there's a lot that we can do with regard to elevating belonging in the midst of conflict by understanding the individual actions we all get to take in the midst of any kind of challenge or conflict. And it starts with you. Like everything that we are talking about when it comes to belonging starts with you. And when you understand that, it's not about you having to point out what somebody is doing wrong. If you ain't got the solution, if you're not coming with some real understanding that I'm here to like do something different about this thing, what are we talking about? So I think it's important for us to always remember, particularly in state government, as we've talked about how we're dealing with a lot of kind of antiquated ideals, a lot of antiquated processes that have caused harm. So what are we doing when we think about conflict and belonging? What is that individual action you can take? And I want to leave you all with the understanding that it starts with you. Mikia, what do you want to leave with the people regarding conflict and belonging?
It starts with you. It starts with your mindset, what you're willing to seek understanding on. So I would leave them with seek understanding in all the situations.
Brilliant. Megan.
I guess I would say, what you put out is what you get back, right? So there's that concept of the energy you push out is what you get back. And if you are not someone who's going to give grace, you are not giving grace. And I don't know about y'all, but I know I'm not perfect. I make mistakes every day. And I would love to be forgiven and give them some grace for them, right? But if I'm the one out there always quick to point out where someone else is wrong, then, you know, how can I expect someone to give me the grace when it's going to be needed? Because it will be. And then this idea of like so much about conflict is we love the drama. Everyone's watching. That's why these reality shows are like so famous, right? We all want, give me the drama, give me my show, right? Whatever it is, they got a flavor for everything now. We like the drama. But the reality is these are people's lives. Now, some of it's scripted, right? But the conflicts that are happening are impacting real people. And I think all of us in Washington should be thinking about, what are we doing in Washington to be different? How are we going to center each other, our communities, our humanity, to be different, to be the light, to make sure every person in Washington state feels like this is their state too.
There it is. There it is. Well, the actions are on y'all. And ultimately, we do this podcast to give you a glimpse into how we're actually talking about belonging in state government. And this is across multiple agencies. And y'all have seen some brilliant folks here. And we're going to be showing more and more perspectives as we move forward, because it's important for us to be able to share what we're talking about so y'all understand how you see yourself in it. Ultimately, this is on all of us. And whether you're in state government or you're not, these actions are really about you and bringing the things that you can to ensure that belonging is real. Whether we're talking about conflict inside or outside of it, on the side of it, neutral, whatever you see yourself as, how we can educate ourselves right now on some of these international conflicts we're experiencing, and maybe understand internally some of the conflicts we may be experiencing in our role, on our job, in our family, in our community. These kind of things are going to help you get to the point where you're resolving conflict in a way that creates win-win solutions. It doesn't have to be a win some, lose some game. This is something that we can all walk away feeling whole. And that's really what belonging is about. How do we make sure that in the midst of conflict, we are serving Washingtonians so they feel whole? For us as state government, that's important. So if you are one of those folks, 67,000 folks that are working for state government, ask yourself what you're doing to make Washingtonians feel whole. Thanks so much for listening and watching When We Belong podcast. Appreciate you. Thank you so much, Megan and Mikia. Great work, y'all.